Chapter 2. It is strange to think that at home in the drawer of my writing table there lies a beginning of the play called Saul and a bundle of poems. Many an evening I have worked over them. We all did something of the kind. But that has become so unreal to me I cannot comprehend it anymore. Our early life is cut off from the moment we came here, and that without our lifting a hand. We often try to look back on it and to find an explanation, but never quite succeed. For us young men of 20, everything is extraordinarily vague. For Kropp, Muller, Lear, and for me, for all of us whom Kantorek calls the Iron Youth. All the older men are linked up with their previous life. They have wives, children, occupations, and interests. They have a background which is so strong that the war cannot obliterate it. We young men of 20, however, have only our parents, and some perhaps a girl. That is not much, for at our age, the influence of parents is at its weakest, and girls have not yet got a hold over us. Besides this, there was little else, some enthusiasm, a few hobbies, and our school. Beyond this, our life did not extend, and of this nothing remains. Kantorek would say that we stood on the threshold of life, and so it would seem. We had as yet taken no root. The war swept us away. For the others, the older men, it is but an interruption. They are able to think beyond it. We, however, have been gripped by it and do not know what the end may be. We only know that in some strange and melancholy way, we have become a wasteland. All the same, we are not often sad. Though Muller would be delighted to have Kemmerich boots, he is really quite as sympathetic as another who could not bear to think of such a thing for grief. He merely sees things clearly. Were Kemmerich able to make any use of the boots, then Muller would rather go barefoot over barbed wire than scheme how to get a hold of them. But as it is, the boots are quite inappropriate to Kemmerich's circumstances, whereas Muller can make good use of them. Kemmerich will die. It is immaterial who gets them. Why then should Muller not succeed to them? He has more right than a hospital orderly. When Kemmerich is dead, it will be too late. Therefore, Muller is already on the watch. We have lost all sense of other considerations because they are artificial. Only the facts are real and important for us, and good boots are scarce. Once it was different. When we went to the district commandant to enlist, we were a class of 20 young men, many of whom proudly shaved for the first time before going to the barracks. We had no definite plans for our future. Our thoughts of a career and occupation were as yet of too unpractical a character to furnish any scheme of life. We were still crammed full of vague ideas which gave to life and to the war also an ideal and almost romantic character. We were trained in the army for 10 weeks, and in this time more profoundly influenced than by 10 years at school. We learned that a bright button is weightier than 4 volumes of Schopenhauer. At first astonished, then embittered, and finally indifferent, we recognized that what matters is not the mind, but the boot brush, not intelligence, but the system, not freedom, but drill. We became soldiers with eagerness and enthusiasm, but they have done everything to knock that out of us. After 3 weeks, it was no longer incomprehensible to us that a braided postman should have more authority over us than had formerly our parents, our teachers, and the whole gamut of culture from Plato to Goethe. With our young awakened eyes, we saw that the classical conception of the fatherland held by our teachers resolved itself here into a renunciation of personality such as one would not ask of the meanest servants. Salutes, springing to attention, parade marches, presenting arms, right wheel, left wheel, clicking the heels, insults, and 1,000 pettifogging details. We had fancied our task would be different, only to find we were to be trained for heroism as though we were circus ponies. We soon accustomed ourselves to it. We learned, in fact, that some of these things were necessary, but the rest merely show. Soldiers have a fine nose for such distinctions. By threes and fours, our class was scattered over the platoons among the Frisian fishermen, peasants, and laborers with whom we soon made friends. Krop, Muller, Kemmerich, and I went to number 9 platoon under Corporal Himmelstas. He had the reputation of being the strictest disciplinarian in the camp and was proud of it. He was a small, undersized fellow with a foxy, waxed mustache who had seen 12 years of service and was in civil life as a postman. He had a special dislike of Krop, Tjaden, Westus, and me because he had sensed a quiet defiance. I have remade his bed 14 times in one morning. Each time he had some fault to find and pulled it to pieces. I have kneaded a pair of prehistoric boots that were as hard as iron for 20 hours, with intervals, of course, until they became as soft as butter, and not even Himmelstas could find anything more to do with them under his orders. Under his orders, I have scrubbed out the corporal's mess with a toothbrush. Krop and I were given the job of clearing the barrack square of snow with a hand broom and dustpan, and we would have gone on till we were frozen had not a lieutenant accidentally appeared who sent us off and hauled Himmelstas over the coals. But the only result of this was to make Himmelstas hate us more. For 6 weeks consecutively, I did guard every Sunday and was hut orderly for the same length of time. With a full pack and rifle, I have to practice on a wet, soft, newly plowed field and the prepare to advance, and the lie down until I was one lump of mud and finally collapsed. 4 hours later, I had to report to Himmelstas with my clothes scrubbed clean, my hands chafed and bleeding. Together with Krop, Westus, Tjaden, I have stood at attention in a hard frost without gloves for a quarter of an hour at a stretch, while Himmelstas watched for the slightest movement of our bare fingers on the steel barrel of the rifle. I have to run 8 times from the top floor of the barracks down to the courtyard in my shirt at 2 o'clock in the morning because my drawers projected 3 inches beyond the edge of the stool on which one had to stack all one's things. Alongside me ran the corporal, Himmelstas, and trod on my bare toes. At bayonet practice, I had constantly to fight with Himmelstas with a heavy iron weapon, whilst he had a handy wooden one with which he easily struck on my arms until they were black and blue. Once, indeed, I became so infuriated that I ran at him blindly and gave him a mighty jab in the stomach and knocked him down. When he reported me, the company commander laughed at him and told him he ought to keep his eyes open. He understood Himmelstas and apparently was not displeased at his discomfiture. I became a past master on the parallel bars and excelled at physical jerks. We have trembled at the mere sound of his voice, but his runaway post horse never got the better of us. One Sunday, as Krop and I were lugging a latrine bucket on a pole across the barrack yard, Himmelstas came by, all polished up and spry for going out. He planted himself in front of us and asked how we liked the job. In spite of ourselves, we tripped and emptied the bucket over his legs. He raved, but the limit had been reached. That means clink, he yells. But Krop had had enough. There will be an inquiry first, he said, then we'll unload. Mind how you speak to a non-commissioned officer, bawled Himmelstas. Have you lost your senses? You wait till you're spoken to. What will you do anyway? Show you up, Corporal, said Krop, his thumbs in line with the seams of his trousers. Himmelstas saw that we meant it and went off without saying a word. But before he disappeared, he growled, "You'll drink this." But that was the end of his authority. He tried it on once more in the plowed field with his prepare to advance, and lie down. We obeyed each order, since an order is an order and has to be obeyed. But we did it so slowly that Himmelstas became desperate. Carefully, we went down on our knees, then on our hands, and so on. In the meantime, quite infuriated, he had given another command. But before we had even begun to sweat, he was hoarse. And after that, he left us in peace. He did indeed always refer to us as swine, but there was nevertheless a certain respect in his tone. There were many other staff corporals, the majority of whom were more decent. But above all, each of them wanted to keep his good job there as long as possible. And this he could do only by being strict with the recruits. So we were put up through every conceivable refinement of parade ground soldiering till we often howled with rage. Many of us became ill through it. Wolf actually died of inflammation of the lung. but we would have felt ridiculous had we hauled down our colors. We became hard, suspicious, pitiless, vicious, tough. And that was good, for these attributes were just what we lacked. Had we gone into the trenches without this period of training, most of us would certainly have gone mad. Thus, only thus were we prepared for what awaited us. We did not break down, but we adapted ourselves. Our 20 years, which made many another thing so grievous, helped us in this. But by far the most important result was that it awakened in us a strong practical sense of esprit de corps, which in the field developed into the finest thing that arose out of the war, comradeship. I sit by Kenrick's bed. He is sinking steadily. Around us is a great commotion. A hospital train has arrived, and the wounded fit to be moved are being selected. The doctor passes by Kenrick's bed without once looking at him. Next time, Franz, I say. He raises himself on the pillow with his elbows. They have amputated my leg. He knows it too then. I nod and answer. You must be thankful you've come off with that. He is silent. I resume. It might have been both legs, Franz. Wegler has lost his right arm. That is much worse. Besides, you will be going home. He looks at me. Do you think so? Of course. Do you think so? He repeats. Sure, Franz. Once you've got over the operation. He beckons me to bend down. I stoop over him and he whispers, I don't think so. Don't talk rubbish, Franz. In a couple of days, you'll see for yourself. What is it anyway, an amputated leg? Here, they patch up far worse things than that. He lifts up one hand. Look here, though, these fingers. That is a result of the operation. Just eat decently and soon you'll be well again. Do they look after you properly? He points to a dish that is still half full. I get excited. Franz, you must eat. Eating is the main thing. That looks good, too. He turns away. After a pause, he says slowly, I wanted to become a head forester once. So you may still, I assure him. There are splendid artificial limbs now. You'd hardly know if there was anything missing. They're fixed onto the muscles. You can move the fingers and work and even write with an artificial hand. And besides, they will always be making new improvements. For a while, he lies still. Then he says, you can take my lace-up boots with you for Mueller. I nod and wonder what to say to encourage him. His lips have fallen away. His mouth has become larger. His teeth stick out and look as though they were made of chalk.